You're listening to The Alien Observer. I'm David McElroy. If you tell people something they already believe, they might call you a genius. They'll sing your praises. But if you give them something new to think about, maybe something that's more complex, their eyes will generally glaze over. Standards of rational discourse are so low today that most arguments that are put forth in favor of or against any idea in particular amount to some sort of emotionally charged factoids, which are thrown out as what they consider to be proof. Most people are unable to think clearly, and their ability to use language precisely reflects that. So more and more of their arguments are intellectually vapid graphics, which they call memes, which are the cultural equivalent of grunting incoherently. More and more of what I hear today and read seems like complete nonsense. Even things which most people treat as great wisdom seems ridiculous and shallow. Then when I run across ideas and information which do seem to be exciting and potentially life-changing, I find that most other people's eyes glaze over when I try to share those things. My uneasiness about this isn't about politics or ideology or religion. It's not about agreeing with me or not. It's not about one particular interest group or another. It's something far more fundamental and something that I consider to be deadly dangerous. It seems to be a difference in how we view the world and how we evaluate fundamental or foundational information, how we process reason and truth, even whether we consider truth to exist or not. It feels as though the intellectual foundations of the Enlightenment have radically eroded, and we're descending into a new dark age in which the philosophical values that I hold dear will largely be forgotten. Have you ever paid attention to a 16th century painting called The Blind Leading the Blind? Renaissance artist Peter Bruegel the Elder, and I could be butchering his name. I don't know for sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. But he famously illustrated something which was from one of the parables of Jesus. It's a painting of 6 blind men, and each of the men has his hand on the blind man in front of him. The one in front has already stumbled and fallen into a creek, and the one behind him is falling in too. But the other 4 behind them have no idea what's going on. But they're blindly moving forward to meet the same fate, all because they have been following a blind man who can't lead them to safety because he can't see any better than they can. These blind men trusted the one they followed, apparently thinking they didn't have to figure things out for themselves. But by following the wrong person, they end up stumbling into disaster. I would like to suggest that this is the situation of most people in our modern culture. People aren't physically blind, most of them, but they have become blind to ideas. They know very little about the ideas or justifications behind most of what modern society is all about. They just accept that whatever their culture gives them is good enough, and they don't really question much. And because of this, it has become almost impossible to get people to consider the degree to which their culture is off course. And it's almost impossible to get them to consider the degree to which their own lives are off course because of following that. Almost everybody is blindly following the example of the blind person right in front of him. And almost everybody has become deaf to explanations about why this is a problem, and about why the culture is broken, why their lives could be so much more. But these complex ideas aren't the sorts of things you can explain in a sentence or two. They're not the sorts of things which can be explained by posting some meme on social media. And for those of us who see where the culture is going, and who see why life is so dysfunctional for most people today, it means that it's almost impossible to get anybody to understand, to even listen. Nobody is paying attention, because listening to these ideas would involve having to think and having to question the authority of what they have been taught and the authority of what the people around them are saying with such confidence in their culture. I am tired of having to feel that I have to dumb down ideas in order to even have a chance of having them heard. It's frustrating, partly because it doesn't work to dumb things down. The pioneering media theorist Marshall McLuhan famously said back in the 1960s that the medium is the message, and we are living today in a collection of media, social media, television, news media, and more, which demand oversimplification and which respond to pictures and emotions more than ideas and thought. Our world is in serious danger today because it's in the grips of ignorant ideas, which seem like the equivalent of insanity running through a brain. If you listen to what's being said in the news media, if you listen to what's being said on social media, I don't see how you can come to any other conclusion. Unless rational men and women can step outside the dumbed down oversimplification here and make the case for beautiful and powerful ideas which require serious thought and understanding of complexity, we are doomed. I fear that any idea which is simple enough to be sold on social media is too dumbed down to save us. Now, some people might object that we have never been surrounded by so much information before, because they've been taught to associate information with intellect and ideas. They've been they've been taught to associate information with all of what they believe is good about education. What they don't understand, though, is that the constant flow of excess information we experience today, it doesn't make us any smarter or any more well-educated. It doesn't give us better understanding of the world or of the human condition. This flood of disconnected information just leaves us buried beneath bits and pieces of trivia. We touch enough of it to make us feel positively brilliant, but in reality, what we have is the equivalent of an information jigsaw puzzle of 1 million pieces that will never be put together into a coherent whole. We have been flooded with events and trivia and factoids which leave us feeling full of information, but we rarely see how little we understand about how it all fits together. Finding ways to reasonably filter out about 99% of it from ever even reaching us would help us to be brighter, deeper, and wiser people. And I realize that this contradicts about 98% of what you've heard about the benefits of the information age, but the facts are obvious. Most people today, and this probably includes you, cannot explain anything about the philosophical ideas which underlie how our world works. You might have heard of ideas such as postmodernism and Marxism and the Enlightenment, but very few have the vaguest idea what those things mean. For instance, our world is increasingly under the strong influence of postmodernist thinking. But do you know why? Do you know how it differs from modernism or Enlightenment thinking before that? If you're like most people, probably not. Doesn't mean you're dumb. It just means that you haven't been taught about ideas. I wasn't taught as ideas. I wasn't taught much about ideas as I was growing up. And the older I get and the more I learn, the more I realize how deficient my own education was. So I'm not calling you stupid. I'm simply saying that these are not things that we have been properly taught today. Most people are intimidated of ideas. They weren't required to understand such complexity in school, and nobody taught them why it might be important. That's why they think ideas of these old dead white people are irrelevant to their lives. They honestly don't know that there are consequences to which ideas rule our world. Without understanding what people believe and why, you have no understanding of what's really being done to your children. You have no understanding of what's being done to your money. You have no understanding of what is being done to your culture. And if you have grown enough to become vaguely dissatisfied with life, maybe in ways you don't understand yet, you probably have no understanding of how it could be related to the ideas which underlie this culture. Most people seem unable to evaluate ideas on their own merits today. Instead, they take cognitive shortcuts even more than ever before. This reminds me of something that person might have said, therefore it must be bad. Or this was said by someone who also hates some other bad person, so it must be good. It's guilt or approval by association. And if you ask the person to defend his position on something, whether he opposes something or favors it, he falls back on platitudes and emotions which have little rational connection to the position he's taken. Or maybe he said he feels threatened by the fact that you ask him to explain himself or defend himself. All of this is happening because of poor intellectual development. People have been inundated with information, but they have very little understanding, insight, or wisdom about much of anything. They would rather be watching television or posting memes on social media. I know you won't believe me, but you would be much happier in the long run if you'd turn that television off and leave it off, especially that abomination called the news. If you want a better life, and if you want this culture to have any chance at having a redemption story, you have to make a commitment to reading better books, talking about more serious ideas with smarter people and more interesting people, and understanding how all of this fits together. Until that happens, nobody can help you. Even if I beg you to look at something which threatens to destroy you or to destroy your children, you won't be able to understand it because it will sound like someone speaking a foreign language which you've never even heard. And I know this can't possibly make sense to you yet, to most of you, without understanding a lot more than I can explain here. But the biggest difference all of this will make in your future is for your family. You see, having a happy and loving family is a form of rebellion against a dysfunctional modern culture. Because in a dysfunctional culture, there is no way for you or your family to fit in unless you become dysfunctional as well. This is why most families are so messed up. They are the intellectually blind who are following other blind people, blind patterns, and a blind culture. They are living their lives the way the culture dictates. And there's little way to be happy when you're living as the dysfunctional culture tells you to live. I'm starting to think that the Amish had the right idea. Not about living with almost no modern technology, although there might be some merits to some of that, but about living in tightly knit communities with other people who deeply share the same specific values. Because if you live as part of a dysfunctional world, you and your children are going to be dysfunctional and unhappy in the end anyway. You have two choices when it comes to following the culture around us. For one, you can find your self-worth through the patterns that you're taught on social media and in the mass media. For instance, if you want the most social media likes and shares or whatever popularity online, all you have to do is to take a dogmatic position which is popular with one of the two major political groups. It doesn't matter what the position is. It doesn't matter whether you understand it or not. It doesn't matter whether you understand the arguments involved. It doesn't matter whether you understand the history or the philosophy behind it, behind any of it. Just post simplistic one-liners that you probably know are intellectually dishonest in order to amuse your shallow allies by attacking the dumbest of the opposition. And there's always some dumb people on the the other side. I don't care what side you're on. You can find dumb people among the opposition, and you can pretend that all of them are like them. If you'll do this, and if you'll ignore all complexity and nuance, which could call your simplistic position into question, you can make yourself popular. You can make yourself loved by the mob on your side. And what could possibly be more important than that? But there is another way. It's a way that involves substance. It's a way that involves finding a way out of the mess which modern culture and modern politics have given us. You can turn off the flow of trivia, and you can consciously choose to learn what nobody even told you that you would need to understand. I had to go through that process, and it seems never ending. I'm constantly finding things that I realize I need to understand, things which nobody ever bothered to teach me were important. I refuse to go along with this culture. I'm going somewhere that is going to be far more interesting. It's an intellectual and emotional and philosophical journey with more complexity than you can imagine. But the payoff can make dramatic differences for the future of the world, and for your own future, and for your children's future. If you'll stick around after this quick break, I'll be back with more. When I launched my first podcast, I took a friend's recommendation about which hosting service to use. He told me that Anchor.fm was the only one that I ought to consider. And it turns out that he was right. I had such a great experience with the free Anchor service that I'm also using it for this second podcast too. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. And best of all, it's free. I don't know how they do it, but it's free. I record and edit my podcasts on my own MacBook, but Anchor even has tools to allow you to record straight into a web browser, or even your mobile phone if you're not ready for the challenge of doing your own recording. Anchor will handle all the distribution of your podcast too, getting it into all of the major podcast directories such as Apple, Google, and Spotify. They even have a plan by which you can run ads if you want, but you're not required to if you don't want to. Anchor has everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started today. You are where you are in life, and I am where I am, intellectually and philosophically, because we have followed what our culture told us was important. Often we have done that blindly. I know I used to do that. If you like the shallow world that this creates for us, then you're very unlikely to understand or appreciate any of the things that I've been talking about. But if you know that something is wrong in the world around you and probably in your own life as well, I'd like to offer another path. It won't be easy. There will be some sacrifice. It might even be scary at times. But if you're willing to take this step with me and with some other people who are trying to go back to some of the core Enlightenment ideas of the past, the ones that gave us ideas about freedom and individualism and the dignity of every single individual human being, you first have to stop blindly following your culture, because you are heading toward a dangerous crash on this path. I hope you'll consider going in the direction that I'm going. I certainly don't intend to end up in the ditch with the rest of the blind men. I hope you won't either. The Alien Observer is written and produced by me, David McElroy. If you'd like to get in touch, send me an email at davidmcelroy@mac.com. That's DAVIDMCELROY@mac.com. Or go to anchor.fm/The Alien Observer to record a voice response. Anything you send might end up on a future episode. There's also a donation link on that page if you'd like to support the show. For more about me and what I've written in the past, including thousands of articles over the last 10 years, go to davidmcelroy.org. The Alien Observer is copyright 2020 by David McElroy. All rights are reserved on the planet Earth, but rights are still pending on the planets where the rest of the aliens live. Theme music is The Boy and the Kite by Solitude and is licensed courtesy of Soundstripe. The birds and crickets from the opening was recorded live in my own backyard. Please join me again next time for more observations about this strangely alien world that's all around us.